Good morning, friends. Happy Sunday. I'm running a little behind on this homily video, but I'm happy to be speaking on the readings here. It is a beautiful Sunday morning here in the UP, and the leaves have changed, and we've had some snow, and there's some clear skies poking through today. So it is the first day of the week, the day of the resurrection, the Lord's Day. In our gospel, we have this passage where the Pharisees, the scribes, the Jewish leaders challenge Jesus, and they're trying to entrap him. They're trying to get him to come out either against Roman authority by telling the people not to pay the temple tax, or alternately against Jewish authority by endorsing kind of the Roman occupation and rule. And as he does several other times, Jesus kind of threads through the trap, right? And he doesn't fall into it. He doesn't give them what they desire. But he does give us something very powerful. He gives us a phrase which I think has been repeated and resonated even as we struggle to put it into practice in different times and places. In a more traditional translation, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. The first part of that, of course, is directly speaking to that question of the temple tax. He shows them the Roman coin, says whose face is on there, and it's the emperor's face, Caesar's face, and he says we'll give that back to him. The church has interpreted this kind of pragmatically, along with some of St. Paul's statements, to mean that in general, as Christians, we follow duly appointed authority. We don't say that we live in God's kingdom, so we ignore civil government, or we violently oppose civil government necessarily. Under ordinary circumstances, in most times and places, we're called to obey duly appointed authority, even in that irksome manner of paying taxes. But I think there's actually a bigger, maybe a more challenging spiritual consequence of what Jesus said. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. Well, if the coin has the image of Caesar on it, where do we find the image and likeness of God? What are we to render unto God if we're to render the coin, worldly things, unto the civil government? Well, brothers and sisters, it's us. Look in the mirror or look at any other human being. We're we're that which bears the image and likeness of God. And so when Jesus tells the people to pay the tax, he also tells them, but give yourself, your whole heart, body, mind, and soul, all your strength, give yourself to God. Worship God alone. Entrust your heart to God first. And I think that's actually pretty challenging for us to live. As I think back maybe to middle school and high school, as I remember hearing that commandment, you shall have no other strange gods before me, that idea of not worshiping some other god. I think, like many people, I probably thought something along the lines of, well, here in Dickinson County, I'm not sure there's any pagan temples. I haven't offered any incense to Thor. Okay, I'm good on that one, so I'll move on. And of course, as I went farther down the list of commandments, I may have found some things that seemed to have more traction in my life, both then and now. But of course, I think that question of worshiping God alone isn't reducible to like formal paganism. It's not reducible only to the kind of exterior and obvious worship of some other deity. But it can really challenge us about what we give our hearts to, maybe in place of God or before God. Let me just give a very common kind of UP example. What happens in the summer here in the UP fairly frequently, and I know the temptation of this myself, is that a lot of people, a lot of families go out to the woods. Maybe it happens also during deer season. And, being out in the woods on Sunday morning, it's pretty convenient not to get up and go to Mass. I'm not sure I never missed Mass during deer season. Looking back, there were some times I think that we went to Mass, but maybe not every time. What does that mean when we kind of say to God, hey, God, I love your creation. It's so beautiful, but I'm not going to follow your commandments. I'm not going to actually keep the Sabbath holy by attending Mass. It's too inconvenient. I'd have to drive 20 minutes or half an hour to go to Mass, or even an hour. I'd have to drive that far. Well, we drive that far for recreation. Why wouldn't we make that effort for God? And so notice the thing itself, being out in the woods with family and friends, enjoying the natural world, that's a good thing, even a holy thing. But when we place it before God, it becomes something we're worshiping, some place we're giving our heart, some place where we're not rendering ourselves unto God. Just a concrete example, maybe relevant to our circumstances here up in the North Country. Lots of other things can possess our hearts. It can be a hobby. It can be academics. It can be worldly success. It can be possessions. It can be relationships. Lots of other things in our lives to which we can kind of give our hearts, and maybe not intentionally, maybe not kind of with full knowledge, but we end up putting that before God. We end up focusing on that rather than on God. And this really damages our relationships in our families, in our friend groups, in our workplaces. Here's one that I'm aware of in my own heart. We are called to love the truth. Jesus is the truth. We're called to seek the truth. But I've noticed in my own heart how frequently I can become attached not to the truth, but to being right. And boy, is that a big difference, right? The one is about something bigger than me, something beyond me that calls me to conversion. But the being right is about something selfish, something self-congratulatory, something where I kind of win over someone else. I'm confident that there have been relationships in my life that at least have been damaged by maybe me not noticing that I was seeking to be right more than seeking the truth. Maybe that's one that fits for you. Brothers and sisters, I think a place where this is very evident in these days is in the political sphere. Right? We're in a democracy. We're called to follow politics to some extent, to vote, to choose a candidate, to try to kind of think about which party we support and why. None of those things are bad. In fact, there's a way in which we have an obligation to attend to that, to attend to those important questions. But how often do we put our political affiliation or our devotion to a particular candidate before God? I read a really thought-provoking article this summer on the Call to Communion website. It was written by a convert to Catholicism, and he was just reflecting on how Christians, Catholic, and other Christians as well, how often we may actually filter the world first through a political ideology, first through a partisan affiliation. That may be our starting point. And then we kind of pick and choose the pieces of the gospel that correspond to that. So what we're worshiping, the place we're giving our heart, isn't to the Lord first. But it's to that political party, that candidate, that ideology. This is really dangerous because no party, no candidate, no ideology captures the fullness of the gospel. We have here no lasting kingdom. No political candidate or party are going to establish here the kingdom of God. That doesn't mean they don't matter. That doesn't mean they're not important. That doesn't mean we don't strive to build government that is in keeping with the truth of the human person, of human dignity. But it does mean that we resist the temptation to put absolute expectations on those, and especially to substitute those processes, those goals, for the goals of the kingdom, for the goals of our faith. One place I think where this expresses itself is when we give ourselves permission to hate people who disagree with us, when we give ourselves permission to disparage, to treat as certainly malicious or certainly stupid or certainly bad people with whom we disagree. Sure, there are stupid people out there. Sometimes we behave in a stupid way. There are malicious people out there. I'm certainly capable of malice myself. But when we start there, when we give ourselves permission to hate, let me just put this in really strong terms, brothers and sisters. When we give ourselves permission to hate people with whom we disagree, we write our own ticket to hell. Jesus says, love your enemy. He says, love your neighbor. Right? After the Lord alone, the human person that we encounter is the face of Christ to us. And so that's true even in the political sphere. I notice this on social media, right? How easily people from all different sides of the conversation automatically assume that the people they disagree with are idiots or evil or selfish or superficial. Maybe, again, there are instances of that, but when that's our starting point and when we give ourselves permission to hate, we are certainly disobeying the Lord's command to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. Maybe one of these examples strikes home for you. Maybe there's some other thing in your life that tends to draw you away from really giving your heart to God. On this Sunday, this homily at the Eucharist, we'll be preparing, hopefully, all of those present to receive the Lord's body and blood. Whenever or wherever you're listening to this, maybe I would encourage you just to take a few moments of silence and ask the Lord to show you, Lord, what am I putting before you? What am I putting in your place? Where, Lord, am I turning away from you to give my heart to some other thing? And we can ask the Lord, who is perfect mercy and perfect love, to give us his grace to draw our hearts back to him, to draw us back more into communion with him, and then loving him and serving him, rendering our hearts unto him, to then deal with and engage and navigate all the other things this life demands of us. Brothers and sisters, know of my prayers for you, and please pray for me. God bless.